This button. There you go. All right, so what we're going to be doing today, we're going to be taking a YouTube URL, a Github repo. We're going to use a little bit of LangChain, not a lot, and some ChatGPT, and it's going to generate a code-accurate tutorial for us. So the old way of doing that was really labor-intensive. Godfrey would do all the work, making the video, doing the meetup, etc. And then I would download the transcription, and then basically I would be looking at the GitHub repo, listening back to the video at 1.5 speed, and a lot of unnecessary work for content that's actually already been created in full, right? Everything we need to know about the content already kind of exists there, and so using the article generation method, a lot easier. You make the content, and then we're just making sure that the right information gets into our form, and then we're sending it off to a bunch of APIs to kind of work together to format an output that we could work from, a nice foundation to build something very, very quick. So the challenge we have to overcome is hallucinations and, kind of overconfident wrong answers, right? There's a helpful metaphor to kind of figure out what is causing hallucinations that I think kind of will also help you figure out a way to kind of contain them. You want to keep them in their box and stop them from popping out. So imagine if we squeezed every word that ever existed on the internet into a 2D grid, and we wanted to create a vector from our intercept to find the next best word in a phrase. Now, in this example, I say, let's have a picnic at the... Now, you would think this is a stupid answer, but autocorrect actually did this to me one day. This word, pork. So, and autocorrect is not that dissimilar from LLMs. LLMs are kind of giant word predictors, right? You give it enough context, and it's trying to give you what it thinks the likely response is. And vectors are a good way to explain that. And so how do we kind of overcome that? Super long, highly detailed prompts is one way. And the other thing is to kind of create as many guideposts around the prompt so that it's not able to give us that junk answer. So everything that I'm doing here is basically steps to kind of contain the stupid from leaking out. So this is going to be our main prompt, but we'll go into detail later, don't worry. But you can even see here, just glancing, there's redundancies. So write an 800-word article based on the content, and then step 6 is also saying 800 words. And does it output 800 words when it feels like it? It's definitely closer than when not, right? So we're going to be using Flask. Godfrey's been using Flask. Flask is easy to set up, that's why. My folder structure is a little bit more complicated than what you would generically do because it would just be the run.py, init.py, and your templates. We've added some utilities that are going to handle each of the different calls. And it's easy to break it out so we can see what's going on with each of those and just kind of error correct without having to edit giant blocks of code, right? So I put the requirements in a file. You could just hit pip install, boom, bing, boom, boom, and they're all going to go in for you. You'll see Anthropic at the top. The reason I left it there, and I also left it in the GitHub code, is you could try out different models. And one of the things that LangChain makes really easy is to swap models in and out. And then also just in terms of thinking which LLM is best for the task, I think that's something people should be thinking about a lot now because they are getting built to task. There's, strengths and weaknesses among each, and also style, right? So they could both generate an answer that could generally be considered correct, but, style points for one or the other, right? All right, so getting Flask going, here's some boilerplate. I know Godfrey's covered this before, but your run.py is basically going to create your app. In my example, we're running it in debug. And then my init is making sure that I could get all my config variables or sensitive variables in, and then also the routes. So making our form, we're going to start with our front end here. This is, despite looking like a lot, it's actually just a very basic form. We've got our speaker name, our speaker bio, our video title, our video description. These are all hand input fields or done by you. Then the YouTube URL, the GitHub repository URL, and our submit button. The only required fields, I think, are the speaker, which you could substitute with channel title, video title, and the two URLs. All right, so then if we have our form, we also need kind of a template for the article that's going to be generated. I have some light styling here so it doesn't look like total crap, but I didn't do any styling because this is not a CSS seminar. So grabbing the text file from YouTube. Right now, I should probably note that YouTube's terms of service don't want you to be grabbing transcripts programmatically from video channels you don't own. This library does allow you to do that because it's unofficial, but it will only work locally. So if you try to run this on a server, you will lose at least a day figuring out that you're going to have to set up a real OAuth setup with Google Cloud. So my functional version that I share with other people, that does that, but you can run this in a lightweight fashion locally on your computer. So that's one of the only kind of things that would have to change if you're going to build this into a real application. All right, so YouTube ID. So the stuff at the top here, past our imports, is just because there's a lot of different YouTube URL formats, and they actually tend to add new ones whenever there's a new piece of content. As you can see, Shorts and Live have been added, and actually Live used to just be regular URLs, so that's something that I had to account for now since we do live streams when the computer wants to work. Ultimately, this is pretty boring. This is how we grab the transcript. It's very, very straightforward, right? So we're just using that YouTube transcript API, asking it to get the transcript. We're putting in that video ID that we just parsed from the last function. And then we're taking the text that comes out of that and we're actually making that into text that we can use elsewhere. All right, so why GitHub? Why are we using GitHub at all? Well, our YouTube captions, that's where our transcript texts are coming from, are known as craptions because they generally are not good at proper nouns. They make up weird things. They're going to give you answers like the pork example we saw before. So to kind of curb that, our code is probably the most sensitive piece of information in our entire output that we're looking for. So that's why we're keeping the code separate from that, and we're doing its own call. So I'm not going to go into this section. It's here for you to go through, but this is how you get your GitHub API key. Just be sure to not allow too much access. You want the least amount of access, and that pretty much goes with any API, but with GitHub, you can open up the world rather easily. All right, so our GitHub code is not hard. It's basically just a get, right? The only thing that's happening is it's taking our URL, it's breaking it up into two parts. So that's the owner, that would be me in my case, Mike Pehel, and then the repo name, which I think is video-article for this one. And then it's going to use that in the next section, or the response from that. And we're going to scan our GitHub repo. So GitHub repos could get pretty large. If you forked from somebody else, you probably are inheriting a lot of junk that you don't need to write your tutorial. And in that case, what we've done here is we're only pulling out files that have certain file extensions. So you can see that here, .py, .js, .html, .css, etc. And you can make this as strict or as open as you want, so that you're only pulling out the portions of the code from the repo that you need. And this is really important because we have a limited token window, right? So it can't be all code, and it can't be all instruction, and it can't be all transcript. We've got to kind of balance this. We're making a soup here. The other thing that I pull, and depending on how big the repo you're pulling, you might want to take this out, is README content, because if README content exists, it's generally a good guide for figuring out how we want our tutorial content. It could also provide extra context for the LLM. So now we're going to introduce LangChain. So LangChain's really cool. It allows you to chain together a whole bunch of different LLM functions. Almost every kind of release I've seen from OpenAI lately, maybe not every, but a lot of them, I'm like, wait, didn't we have that in LangChain months ago? Perfect example is structured outputs. So like, let's say you wanted a JSON output. Yeah, LangChain had that in January. If you wanted to set up different LLMs, give it a basket of them and say, use the one that's best for the task and give it 5 tasks, it could do an agentic chain for you. So you could build really, really complicated, very bespoke AI applications. That being said, we're just going to be using the text splitter function, which I'm sure exists somewhere else on the internet, but it's easy to do with our current thing. So what are we using LangChain for? We're going to be deriving topics from our transcript. So remember our 2D grid from before. We kind of want to encircle the right answer, create as many guideposts around the possible right answer for the LLM so that it's not targeting other vectors that would be kind of off the mark. So what I do is I pull from the transcript chunks of about 300 characters with a little bit of overlap in between each of them because, this is not an exact science of determining, oh, this is a block of stuff that makes sense together. We're just randomly pulling blocks at this interval. So the overlap kind of corrects for that. And then we're assigning topics and summaries of those topics and putting those in a array for us to pull later. All right, so we've got all of our big outputs. We got the form input from speaker name, video information. We've got our GitHub repo. We've got our transcript. Now we're gonna create a routes.py file, and we're gonna route all of these. If you can see at the top, basically our @main route, pretty self-explanatory there. It's gonna be responding to get and post requests. We only have one big function. That's our index function, and that's gonna be handling all of this. So we're taking in all of the variables that we've collected, and then from the form input, and then the first thing it's going to do is it's going to pass it off to that YouTube module, and we're going to get our transcript. Then it's going to get our topics. Then it's going to analyze our repo. Then it's going to combine all that with our speaker info into our generate article function. I've assigned an article variable from the output of the generate article function, and inside the generate article function is transcript text, topics, topic summaries, GitHub code, README content, speaker info, video title, and video description. Right now you're starting to see a pattern here, right? We're pulling together all of these variables. Another thing I want to note, we'll get into it a little bit later, is use of Markdown. Just kind of keep that in your mind's eye for a second. All right, so now on to the fun part. How are we going to generate our article? So we're taking all that stuff. We're going to launch our OpenAI AI client, and then with our system message, or system directive, as it's sometimes called, we're going to define kind of some guardrails for our LLM, what it's going to think of itself while it's writing, what it's going to prioritize. So here you see PX4 ecosystem at SDK. For whatever topics that you're covering, you can easily just input those here. This is a good way to kind of set the expertise of your LLM. And then we went into this a little bit before, but you can see all of the different variables that we pulled in from before are now becoming part of our prompt. We've now giving it additional instructions. Most of these are basically telling it to not behave like a normal LLM in its answer. Like reducing the amount of bullets. It loves bullets. It never wants to get rid of bullets. Also, it would love to just give you giant blocks of code without context. So we're forcing it to break up our code into different kind of sections, no larger than 14 lines if possible. And also, we're telling it to introduce the concepts behind the code, so not to just drop code in without explaining this. So it becomes less of kind of like a rote manual and more of an actual tutorial with context. And then the final part is just the response. So this format is pretty simple. Role for the system and the system message, and then the user becomes the prompt. The assistant would be the actual response. In the structure. Now Perplexity has the same structure as this, but Claude and Sonnet, they have a different structure, so I left that in there for Anthropic. So you'll also notice here we have a final check code against our article, and yeah, we're gonna run another prompt call. And the reason for that is, even despite all of that extra redundancy that we put into there, we've actually given the LLM a lot to think about. And it it's still going to generate hallucinated code every once in a while. To make sure that that doesn't happen in the final output, we then do some kind of cleanup here with a final system directive or another call with a system directive that is explicitly creating a context for it that you are only auditing this final output. So we're no longer in generating mode, we're in auditing mode. So it's not going to completely change your article whole cloth. I've actually tested this input to output. It makes minor edits when they're necessary, or no edits if they're not necessary. So then the final part of this is kind of pretty rote. Same story as before. It's going to give us a final output, and then that final output is going to end up in our generated article. So let's see if I can get this going. Yeah, I'm going to hit this. Hopefully it won't fail. It's going to take a few minutes or a minute or two. In the meantime, I'm going to give you some kind of places to look forward. So how would you extend the length of an article? So in my version, it's actually double the length, and that required me to tie together multiple API calls and chunk them together. How do you do that without introducing new hallucinations? Another thing that my application that I use for Godfrey is able to do is it can input slide decks, so Google Slides or PowerPoint. I have different content types because Godfrey's not my only client, so I have ones that could do company profiles rather than tutorials, or they can take conversations from an interview and turn them into dialogues. Another thing that I'm working on, and I'm pretty close to completing, it works, I would just like it to add more images, is adding images. So taking that slide deck and parsing it. You know, there's a lot of ways to actually use all of these different APIs together to generate a whole piece of content. It's just a matter of how you're kind of mixing things together or not, right? And then figuring out how to make sure that the output is contained within a specific domain to avoid hallucinations and errors. Any questions before we check if the article actually produced in time? Anybody?
Yeah, I've got a question. One of the things that I was working on with the slides was trying to see if I could parse the notes. So it gets the slides okay, but it doesn't get the notes, and I put a lot of information in the notes. You ever figured out how to do that? Or does your app already do that?
If it's in Google Slides, it should be able to parse the notes.
Maybe I should just put it into Google Slides. That's a good idea. Okay. Okay, thanks.
Yeah, check Google Slides.
Yeah, I'm using PowerPoint.
Yeah, because even if you import your PowerPoint, it should import the notes along with it too.
Okay.
So depending on what you're most comfortable with. Anybody else? I see Richard Lopez. I haven't seen you in a while. How you doing, sir?
I am doing well. It has been a long time.
Yeah,
I'm
yeah.
very excited to learn what you're doing, and I'm pretty excited about this. So, trying to take it all in.
Yeah, let's see if we got an output. Oh, there it is. So now we have our article on the attack plugin. So you can see we've got code in here. And this is pulling from the GitHub. And I don't know how much more accurate Sonnet is in terms of the code, but actually this looks pretty dead on from the original reference article. I'll take a look. Like I said, different APIs or different LLMs have different strengths and weaknesses. I've personally found that Anthropic is better at this code handling part, but I do find that ChatGPT is a little bit better on the imaginative side in terms of like the language it uses, whereas Sonnet tends to be a little drier. Any other questions?
No, that's super cool. Yeah, I'm reading what you put in there, and it's pretty close. There's a couple of formatting things I would do, especially where it was doing the dependencies, but everything else looked bang on.
Yeah, like I said, I use Sonnet usually for the code stuff. So, And
Is the code available anywhere? Can people play with this?
yeah. So here you go.
There we go.
So this is the stripped down version, just with these limited functions. If you have any questions about like the bigger app, happy to share that code with you. I just wanted to get something down to, something I could actually get through in one sitting. Because for example, the double content or doubling the length, the context window is a real barrier right now. You could only output so much, right? And I've tried beta versions with like larger windows, and they either fail, like they won't even run like 80% of the time if you give them too much input, or the output is questionable, especially around the edges towards the end of the content. So that took a while, and then in terms of getting images and other stuff in, I think the thing you're always contending with content transfer is humans find inventive ways to break the rules, or come up with different ways to attack different problems. So, for example, Godfrey often will copy and paste code or screenshot his code and throw it in. But yeah, I found out how to parse your notes, Godfrey. So that's how.
Okay.
That's how we got around that once. But then I think it was last week she didn't. It was mostly.
Well, you can always tell me to just cut and paste the code instead of cut and paste the image. I'm more than happy to do that.
Yeah, but
I will
also
tell you,
I
I
appreciate
will
the
tell you that
challenge,
the Vision the Vision API from I was using it today. The Vision API from OpenAI is amazing.